I like to use the word nutritional ketosis. Ketosis is a buzzword. It's everywhere. First of all, what the heck is it? We're gonna talk about that. But if you don't include the nutritional component of any type of diet that you put into your life, then you're missing the mark. You're definitely missing the mark. And for me, it's super important because I'm looking at health from a cellular level. And so nutrition is a huge part of that. Healthy fat is back. And I'm super excited about this because I love to eat fat. And when they took away our bacon and they took away our butter and they took away our egg yolks, a lot of changes have happened in the medical paradigm. So I'm super excited that healthy fat is back, and we can talk about that today. My name is Dr. Michelle Bean. I'm a chiropractor. I live in Santa Cruz, California. So what the heck is keto? What is keto? So ketosis is a metabolic state where your body changes from burning primarily carbohydrates or glucose to burning fat. This is a natural process. This is something that happens in our body. We don't have to force the body to do it, but we can certainly coax it. And ketosis, even though it has a coined terminology, when we use the word ketones or ketosis, ketogenic, this is a process that's been occurring in the human body, in cellular, in our cells for as long as we've been around, basically. It comes about during times of fasting, prolonged exercise, so when you burn through all of the carbs that you have through exercise, or through low carb intake, so you don't have a lot of carbohydrates and the body switches over to burning fat. So again, it's a natural process. The body is very well adapted to burning stored fat as fuel. Why do we have ketones? So first of all, I didn't tell you what a ketone is. A ketone is when your body switches from burning glucose to burning fats, we get a breakdown of lipids into what's called triglycerides. And these triglycerides can be converted by the liver into little ketone bodies. They're a lot smaller than long-chain fatty acids. So they're broken down into a smaller ketone body, and then it can pass the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain so that the brain can use it as fuel. And it's a lot quicker and easier to metabolize, so your body can quickly use this as energy. So a ketone or a ketone body is a breakdown of fatty acids. And it's basically in the form of dietary fats, so ingesting, taking in, consuming dietary fats, or switching over into burning the stored fat that we have in our adipose tissue. So that's what ketones are. And why do we have these ketones? There has been, on this planet and through the evolutionary adaptation, many times of starvation. So they call it the feast and famine cycles. And our ancestors didn't have, supermarkets the way we do today. They didn't have access to food 24 hours a day. In fact, there was many, many times where they could go weeks or months sometimes without eating. And so the adaptation is you can consume fats or you can consume carbohydrates, but the body has the capacity to either store the fats that you're consuming and store them as fat so that it can later be used as fuel, or when you take in a lot of glucose in a short amount of time, you use that glucose for immediate sources, but then any excess carbohydrates, and I know that you've heard this, excess carbohydrates your body converts it into fat. So then we have this capacity to store this fat so that when we go into the famine cycles and there's no food around, your body starts breaking down these fats and uses that as fuel. And we have enough fuel in the form of fat in our bodies to sustain us from anywhere between 2, 3, 4 weeks, all the way up to 6, 7, 8, 9 months, depending on who you are. So this is a very efficient adaptation that we have as humans. We've just lost sight of that with this onset of all this availability of food. So the other brilliant thing about ketones is it prevents the breakdown of protein. So it's protein sparing. And if you think about this, I know people think about fasting in today's society or not consuming enough glucose. When you even mention the word low carbohydrate, it's like, it seems so scary because we've been told, or we assume that if we're not consuming carbohydrates, the body's going to turn to our muscle or to protein, and that's not the case. Our ancestors, when they were using fat as fuel and they didn't have sources of carbohydrates, they weren't withering away and they weren't stupid. They were actually very, very aware. The mental focus was very keen during this time, and also the muscular strength. It wasn't a withering away. Was it actually a times during these famine cycles when we're burning ketones was one of the most aware times, muscular building and increased focus times that our ancestors had. So this is the good stuff. Let's talk about it. Cellular metabolism. So when we're talking about making this metabolic shift, what I mean, metabolic shift from burning carbohydrates as fuel to burning fat as fuel, we need to talk about cellular metabolism. So what is it? It is the breakdown of your macronutrients. So it's the breakdown of your food. There's 3 main macronutrients that are able to be broken down and then turned into fuel for the body. And those 3 are carbohydrates. I know you've heard of this, fats, and protein. And these 3, when they're broken down, they create energy in the form of what's called ATP. So that's the main energy source for the body. So carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. And as long as you have glucose running in your body, your cells are going to use that first. It is the easiest to break down. It doesn't create a lot of energy, but it's very easy for the body and the cells to metabolize it. When you have an overconsumption of carbohydrates that aren't immediately used in the body or not immediately needed, then you can store it in the liver as glycogen. Okay, so, and there's a capacity to store glucose in the liver as glycogen. And once you've reached that capacity, then it shifts over and starts storing it as fat. So fats are broken down into fatty acids, and they are typically either immediately stored as fat, or if the body needs part of the fatty acids as cellular structure, cellular components, it will absorb it and use it in that way. But again, as long as carbs are running in the body, as long as you have a source of carbohydrates, your body's not going to metabolize fats. It's going to always use carbohydrates. And then protein typically isn't used for an energy source. It can be, but it typically is not. As long as you have carbohydrates, as long as you have fats, there's maybe a short period of time where you might transition into burning a little bit of protein as an energy source, but really your body wants to use it as structures, as part of the structural part of cells, and protein is signaling, part of the signaling system of the body. So how does this happen? So this complicated picture here, I'm going to break it down, is a picture of a cell. So I want you to understand something. So we're going to talk about the mitochondria. And you can think about mitochondria as little organelles inside of all the cells. So think about this. We have this human body, right? And within the human body, we know that we have organs. So we have the heart, and we have the liver, and we have the lungs, and we have the colon. We have all these organs, and they have very particular functions in the body. Think on a very smaller scale, a micro scale. Inside of every single one of our cells, we also have little organs, and they're called organelles, and they have very particular functions. The one that I want to talk about is the orange one that you see there towards the front of the cell, which is called the mitochondria. So the main function of the mitochondria is to be the powerhouse of the cell. It creates all of the ATP, which is energy for the body. So without ATP, we don't have any energy, and we don't have the capacity to fuel all of the biological functions that happen on a, constantly all the time. The mitochondria is so powerful, it pumps out 10,000 times more energy gram for gram than the sun. This is a really, really big job that the mitochondria have. And they're a very important part of cellular biology. Again, this is the way we're going to get energy. This is the way we're going to break down the food that we eat and the air that we breathe to create energy to support the biological functions of the body. So the mitochondria are super important. Here's what I want to say about how ATP is formed. So I just said that our body, we have to breathe and we have to eat. And so the body takes in the air that we breathe and the food that we eat, and it breaks it down and it sends it to the mitochondria. So there's another picture of the mitochondria right there. So what happens is we take glucose, or we take fatty acids or ketones, and they go through this complex series of chemical reactions inside of the mitochondria. I don't want to get into how complicated this is, but if you've ever taken a course in biology or cellular biology, you'll remember the glycolysis, you'll remember Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle, and the electron transport chain. So we had to memorize every single reaction in those 3 those three pathways in undergrad and postgrad, really. The end result is it's broken down and electrons are transferred all over the place, and we have phosphate groups doing something, and we have hydrogen atoms. And in the end, what happens is we get this ATP molecule that can be used as an energy source, again, for all of the functions of the body. And along with this ATP, we also get a little bit of heat, we get a little bit of oxygen, and we get, as a natural process of oxidative phosphorylation is what it's called, or as a natural process of cellular metabolism, is reactive oxygen species. So this is also known as, or what creates free radicals. So this is what I want to talk about. The reason that I'm talking to you about mitochondria and the reason we're talking about cellular metabolism is not because I want to confuse you, but what happens is, as a natural byproduct of creating energy, we also get these free radicals. And I'm sure that you've heard of free radicals. Free radicals, we've been talking about them for the past 15 years, and that's why this huge onsurge of antioxidants, take your glutathione and take your vitamin C and take all your vitamins. And what's happened really, again, over the past 50 years is that we're understanding why free radicals are so damaging to the body. But more than anything, it is the increase in the amount of free radicals that we have been created by consuming a lot of carbohydrates. So again, it is a natural process, but what is a free radical? So let's see, how can we do this very simply? So atoms, I'm going to talk to you about atoms. Atoms have, in the middle, they have a nucleus, and the nucleus is composed of what's called protons and neutrons, and they have a certain charge. And let's just assume that it has a certain positive charge. And then on the outside of this nucleus, we have what are called electrons. You may have heard of these electrons, and they orbit on the outside of this nucleus, and they carry a negative charge. And the idea is it's the positive charge in the nucleus, the center of this atom, hopefully matches the negative charge so that it becomes on the outside that's orbiting with these electrons, so that it's a very stable molecule. These atoms, these electrons on the outside, they like to be paired, right? So if for some reason one of these electrons that are spit out during those chemical reactions that are happening in the mitochondria, what happens is oxygen comes around and it collects some of these electrons. But if it doesn't collect two of them, so it's actually paired, so you have two pairs, this becomes a very unstable free radical. This is when it's called a free radical. And you can see the picture there. They're not very happy. So what happens is these free radicals, they become reactive. This is the whole point, is they're very reactive. When they don't have that stable outside electrical pairing process, they start to react with anything that they can around them. And the first place, because a lot of them, the majority of them, 90% of free radicals are created in the mitochondria, the first place that they're going to start attacking is the mitochondria. So when you have an increase or an upsurge in free radical creation, what happens is it starts breaking down the membranes and really breaking down the efficiency of the mitochondria. This is an issue. This is a problem. After that, it can start breaking down cellular DNA. It can break down proteins. It can break down the cellular structures, the outside membrane of the cells. And so it just creates this huge, snowball effect of just leaving so much damage within the cell. The idea is, we have a certain amount of antioxidants and we can take antioxidants, but the idea is to try and balance out this effect of this natural free radical process. The inflammation that's created by this unchecked free radical damage that's happening within our cells is creating a lot of the diseases that we're seeing in Western society today. So, like I said, not all free radicals are bad. They're not terrible. It's actually really important to have some free radicals because it regulates some critical cellular functions within our body, and balance is the key. This is the issue here. It's that we've gotten out of balance with a natural process that's created in our body, and it is the excess free radicals that are very damaging. And it's really the carbohydrates, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. It's the constant consumption and metabolism of carbohydrates that has created this unbalance or this unchecked free radical damage that we hear about in the news. So the idea is like, how do we produce less of these free radicals? ROS is reactive oxygen species. That's what creates the free radicals. So instead of trying to suppress all of this imbalance that we have created, why not try to do it, again, hit it at the core, at the root? So this is why, for me, ketosis and the ketogenic diet has made a huge impression on me, is because the whole idea is to start reducing the amount of carbohydrates that we're eating in the diet. Here's the thing. Our bodies have not evolved to constantly be metabolizing carbohydrates as our main source of fuel. I want to make a distinction between good carbs and bad carbs, right? The idea is, yeah, there's good carbs out there. I love fruit and I love vegetables, right? But when you metabolize, whether we're talking about, a strawberry or blueberry, or we're talking about asparagus, or we're talking about, a sweet potato, or we're talking about donuts and cookies and potato chips, they're all carbohydrates, and they all get metabolized through the process of glucose metabolism in the same way. So even if you didn't have any junk food and you aren't eating processed food, if you're still constantly burning carbohydrates as your main source of fuel, that means you are creating constantly this upsurge of free radicals in your body, never giving your body a break from this. So the thing with carbohydrates, when you metabolize carbs or glucose, you are creating 2 times more the amount of free radicals than when you metabolize fats, and you're getting half the energy. So it is a very inefficient form of cellular energy. Fatty acids, when you break down fatty acids, your heart and your muscles love fatty acids. It is the preferred source of fuel for your heart and for your muscles. Your muscles love fatty acids. And then ketones, again, broken down or created from fatty acids in the liver and sent out to the rest of the body to be used as an energy source too. So what happens with these fatty acids and ketones is you create half the amount of free radicals. This is a really, really important part. And this is where I'm looking at it from a sense of cellular health. If we really want to balance out all of that damage that's being created, the idea is like, then how do we get to the source of cleaning that up? And it is, again, a brilliant evolutionary adaptation, for our cells, to where really our primary source of fuel has been adapted to be fat and not carbohydrates. You're going to get 2 times the more energy. If you've ever heard of anybody who has been in ketosis or has fasted, more than 2, maybe 3 or 4 days, you will hear them say that they have this incredible upsurge of energy. And it's because you're getting a lot more energy from metabolizing fats than you are from constantly metabolizing carbohydrates. All right, so free radicals, again, this is the last thing I'll say about free radicals because I think you're getting it. But because of the inflammation that these free radicals are creating in our body, it is associated with so many disease processes. So inflammation is a systemic inflammation that's created because of all the damage to the DNA and to our cell membranes and really to the mitochondria. Associated with cancer is a metabolic condition, not a genetic condition. A lot of work being done around Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, a lot of neurological conditions, heart disease, chronic pain, obesity, accelerated aging. You saw on the other slide, free radical damage is the #1 cause of aging. And this is well known. So the idea is like, yes, it's a natural process. We are going to have aging, but accelerated aging is what we're talking about. When you accelerate the aging process by constantly burning carbohydrates and constantly accruing free radicals, and then the free radical damage in the body. I'm so glad, again, that healthy fat is back. There are so many health benefits to saturated fat. One of the most important ones, I think, is, of course, the balancing of hormones. But we've gotten this major just imbalance in our hormones by constantly feeding it glucose. And one of the ways that you can understand this is, of course, is your hunger signals, which are hormone-based. So hunger, if you're somebody who feels like if you skip a meal or it's been too long since you've eaten, and you cannot tap into your fat stores as a source of energy because you're not fat adapted, you don't have the metabolic flexibility to switch between the two, then we can start to understand that you might be somebody who has an imbalance in their hormones, because that is the natural way for us, to balance out the body, is to be able to be flexible in the way that we're metabolizing energy. Optimal fuel is, again, fatty acids and ketones. Saturated fat is one of the main building blocks for the cell membranes. This is major signaling patterns. It keeps the cells really healthy, is the outside of the cell, the structure. That's the cell membrane. Again, boosting HDL, this is huge. This is our healthy cholesterol, and limiting free radicals or reactive oxygen species. So how do you do it? All this talk about ketones and ketosis, and all I want to know is, how do I become a ketone maker, right? So it may sound pretty simple, but this is in the most simplest way to tell you, is reduce the amount of carbohydrates. What you want to do, and protein, because again, protein can, one, signal insulin, and two, an excess of protein is going to turn into glucose, which again signals insulin. So the idea is we want to stop signaling so much insulin in the body. But the main way to do this is to reduce the amount of carbohydrates and reduce the amount of protein that you are consuming. And you don't have to do this forever, but in order to get into ketosis, we really want to start thinking about the types of carbohydrates we're eating and the amount of carbohydrates. And you would be really surprised if you had any kind of tracking, or if you actually tried this, how much glucose and how much carbohydrates you are consuming in your diet. You want to be able to burn through the glycogen stores. Again, I said when we're consuming carbohydrates, any excess carbohydrates that your body doesn't immediately need, it's going to get stored in the form of glycogen, and it's just linked glucose. You just link a bunch of glucoses together, it becomes a chain, and it's called glycogen, and then you store it in the liver. And then when your immediate supply of glucose is diminished, then the body will start breaking down glycogen. What you want to do is burn through those stores of glycogen, and what your body eventually will do is it will start using these triglycerides. It'll start using fatty acids and creating ketones, so that you can use that as your energy source. Ketones make really, really great energy. Again, it is your brain loves ketones. Your muscles love ketones. The majority of your cells really love ketones, and they're very efficient. And again, this is something that is metabolically natural process in the body. Some of the research, there's so much research right now. You can PubMed search if you're a geek like me, or there's endless amount of books on all of the research that's been done in the past 60 years. So we need to really start to stabilize the amount of glucose that's in our body and balance insulin. Insulin, once we start getting into insulin, that's a whole nother presentation really in and of itself. We want to reduce the amount of inflammation. There's so much systemic inflammation that goes along with insulin, spiked insulin sensitivity, and raised levels of glucose. There's so much research around the protection, the neuroprotection that's happening in the brain. Anti-cancer, this is one of the main reasons I even started looking into it. Not just that I'm fascinated with cellular health, but all of the research that's gone into cancer and how glucose carbohydrates feed cancer cells. So if you take away their main source of energy, they cannot metabolize anything except for glucose, except for one other small piece of protein. Glutamine, which comes from protein and carbohydrates, is the main source of fuel for cancer cells. Cancer cells have a dysfunction in the mitochondria, that organelle that we were talking about that creates energy. And so they default back to a very, very old primitive way of fermenting glucose in the cytoplasm. So they don't even use the mitochondria. They don't have the ability or the capacity to. So these cancer cells, they start using glucose, and it is their primary source of fuel. And so if you take away their primary source of fuel, you're changing a lot of the genetic expression of those cancer cells. And it gets more complicated than that, but that's one of the main things. A lot of research going into that. And then again, the anti-aging effects. I've been reading a lot on fasting and really looking at the research on ketosis and fasting, and really the metabolic shift to burning primarily ketones and fatty acids, and the wonders that it's doing for the anti-aging effects in the body. Anyone using Bitmoji out there? So what is this F word that we're talking about? You've heard me say it several times again, you guys. Nature has a counterbalance to everything, including eating, and that would be not eating. Think about it. We have night and day. We have light and dark, awake and asleep. And just like, these counterbalances in nature, eating and not eating are the counterbalance to one another. Eating all the time is not normal. It is very common. This is a common practice that we have grown up with. And unless you're somebody who has either a spiritual practice or a religious practice where you practice fasting, then you've probably never done it in your lifetime. Our big brains, of course, have not evolved in spite of fasting, but because we didn't have constant access to food. And again, that is the rise in ketones that happens in the brain. That is a neuroprotective and neuroregenerative. And they also say it is a neurogenesis. You're actually creating new brain cells by burning ketones. There's a long history of fasting, guys. It is the most time-honored, widespread tradition in the world. Every society, every culture, every religion has used fasting on some level. And this is what I was trying to say. As periods of involuntary starvation or fasting faded, ancient cultures replaced them with times of voluntary fasting. We understand on some level that not eating is that counterbalance, right? Three of the most influential people in the world, Jesus Christ, Buddha, and Muhammad, believed in the healing powers of fasting. Ketogenic and fasting go really well together. The reason I'm talking about fasting in this presentation is because they work really well together. I like what I'm finding is very beneficial is to get people into what's called fat adaptation. So you actually upregulate all of the enzymes that are needed to start breaking down fats and using them as your source of fuel. And it takes time to do that. But when you create a diet and a food supply that promotes that, you become what's called fat adapted, and then it's so much easier in this state to go in and out of fasting mode. And we're going to talk about that. I can show you how to do that. 2016, the Nobel Prize winner is this understanding of autophagy. So autophagy, another word, I know I'm throwing a lot of words at you. You don't have to remember this, but autophagy is a process where your body, your cells, when you stop feeding them, you give them the ability to actually rest and repair. This is a really important process in the body. And what happens is autophagy starts breaking down. It's like a recycling of the cellular structures. All of the parts, the little organelles that we talked about earlier that are no longer efficient, or they're either damaged, they're not working properly, your body has the capacity to go in there and clean them up. So it tears them down. All of the parts are actually used for other parts of the cell, and anything that can't be used is eliminated. And then it starts generating like new mitochondria, protein synthesis. There's a lot of really great things that happen during this time of autophagy. Again, I said it builds more mitochondria. Who doesn't want more healthy, lively, efficient mitochondria? Because that's where we're getting all of the energy for the biological processes of our cells. We need this. Stabilizing, when you're fasting, you're stabilizing blood glucose and insulin. Again, if you're not eating, especially if you're not eating carbohydrates, then you're not spiking insulin. This is one of the quickest ways to lose weight. The misconception is that people think that when you stop eating that you're going to start breaking down protein, but we've already talked about that. What happens is when you get through the glucose, you get through the glycogen, your body's going to go to the fats. That's just what they do. And so what happens is if you're burning fat and you're not eating, you're going to lose weight. It's very, very simple. It might not be a simple process, but there's a lot of ways that we can make it easier for people. One of them is ketosis, and there's a couple of other tricks that we can do so that fasting isn't actually like a big deal. Major anti-cancer effects. There's a guy studying it. One of the guys that I'm following, his name is Thomas Seyfried. His recommendation is that every human who wants to have some kind of a preventative therapy for cancer is to fast a 7 to 14 day fast at least once a year. So tremendous anti-cancer effects, builds lean muscle, again, does not break down muscle, it actually builds muscle during these times of fasting. And again, because of the ketones in the brain, major increased focus. Who doesn't want all of that? I certainly do. I've actually been really enjoying my fasting periods, and it's fascinating to not be controlled by my hunger, but actually be able to control hunger. This is one of the main benefits for me that I've noticed. There's different types of fasting. Don't be afraid of the word fasting. There's different ways to do it. There's peak or intermittent fasting. That means you're just fasting during certain time periods of the day, or that also means narrowing the time that you're eating. So it might be anywhere like, 4 to 6 to 7 to 8 hours a day. And then the rest of the time you're fasting. So this is considered intermittent fasting. Some people call it time restricted eating. 34 to 68 hour fasts, and then 7 to 14 day fasts. Alternative day fasting. I'm learning a lot more about the alternative day fasting. There's a water fast and a fat fast. There's different ways to fast. There's different ways to do it and different ways to make it a lot easier, and ways to not trick the body, but continue to feed the body without spiking insulin and without really turning on protein synthesis in the body. And then your body still thinks that it's fasting. My goal with nutritional ketosis, once you check your blood ketone levels and you have above 0.5, you are considered what's called nutritional ketosis. You're starting to learn how to break down fast. And during this early time of nutritional ketosis is when you start upregulating, you're turning on all of the genes in the body that say, I want to burn fat as fuel, right? The majority of us don't have those enzymes in constant flux because we've never done this. We have all of the ones that are associated with carbohydrates. We have all the ones that are associated with fat storage. We have all the ones that are associated, with breaking down of carbohydrates. We don't have the ones, although we have the genes and we have the ability to, we don't have the switch turned on. So during this early stages of nutritional ketosis, the idea is to, one, burn ketones, start burning fat, supply the body with healthy fat so that you can start breaking those down, reduce the amount of carbohydrates in the diet so that your body will start upregulating all these enzymes, and then you can start getting into this fat burning machine that you are designed to be, really. Optimal ketone zone is somewhere between, 1 and about 2.5. Post-exercise starvation, so starvation or fasting ketosis, I've gotten up to about 6.8 and felt really, really tremendous with my fasting. So I try to stay somewhere around, 2, 3 optimal ketone zone. And this is what I consider to be, at some point, it takes a little bit of time where you're actually fat adapted. So metabolically flexible, you guys have heard me say this a couple times already. So the idea is not for the rest of your life to stop consuming carbohydrates. I don't think carbohydrates are bad. I think carbohydrates are incredibly beneficial for the body, but the idea is that we have gotten into this mode where we feel like we have to constantly consume carbohydrates, that we don't give our body a break from consuming carbohydrates, and we don't have the capacity to actually burn fat as fuel. So the idea is, how do we become metabolically flexible? How do we become fat adapted? Let's say that one evening, 1 or 2 times a week, or maybe for an entire week, we decide that we just want to have fruit all day longer. We want to have, whatever your choice is, as long as you don't go crazy. But then to be able to get right back into fat adapted mode, so where you can go in the next day or 2 or 3 to actually transition back into burning fat, because you're supplying your body with a lot of healthy fat, because you're reducing all the carbohydrates, you're giving your mitochondria a break, you're balancing out the free radicals in the body, and you're returning back to what's considered a cellular health mode. I hope that this makes a lot of sense to you. Again, this is me. This is my 6-week, I call it an integration. It's an integrative nutritional ketosis program where I want to introduce ketosis to you. I want to show you how you can incorporate this type of diet. And again, I think diet is really important. When we're talking about diet, we're talking about food. Food really matters. The timing, the quality of food, when you're eating, how much you're eating. All of this is really, really important to begin to really understand how your body metabolizes and uses all of these energy. If you're somebody that's interested in this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm offering during the 6-week program. I want to teach you how to take these concepts, and so you can go on and use this throughout the rest of your life if this is something that you want to do. I want you to learn from it and use it. Use it as much or as often as you want. During the first 6 weeks, we can do health. We have this Tanita. If you're here local Santa Cruz, you come in and you do a weigh-in. And the only reason I'm doing this is because it's really fascinating. And this is what I'm noticing with the groups that I've I've taken through already, it's really fascinating to see not weight changes. I am so not interested in weight. I know that a lot of you are really interested in weight, but my goal and in my interest in doing this is to see how your body shifts from literally burning fat. So it's the fat body percentage and the lean body mass that start to really balance out. And sometimes, I'm noticing this is taking 4 weeks, this is taking 6 weeks. For some people, this might take 7 or 8 or 9 weeks, but you start to see those changes around week 5 or week 6, where your body, the body fat percentage is really dropping. So that's what I'm super interested. That's why I do this measurement. If you're somebody at home who has a scale, I'm going to encourage you to throw that thing away because it's not giving you any information. It is these types of scales, these health measurements that are going to show you the difference between your fat mass, your fat body percentage, and your lean body mass. And that's what I'm super interested in. Where I get most excited is the ketone readings. So we're going to do blood ketone markers and blood glucose readings. And that's another one that we really want to balance out, to making sure that we're bringing the glucose down, because we have so much glucose coursing through our body and through our cells and through our mitochondria. We want to bring that down and increase the amount of ketones. So I'm checking these markers. I think they're so fun and they're so fascinating to see that. I'm going to give you an orientation. During this orientation, it's going to be about a 2-hour orientation. I'm going to walk you through it. What to expect. Everyone's heard of the keto flu. There's definitely ways that you can avoid this ketone flu and make it very manageable as you're making that shift into burning ketones and reducing the amount of carbohydrates, burning through your stored glycogen. I'm going to teach you how to implement this as a lifestyle. I'm going to do meal plans with you. I'm going to give you the recommended supplementation, again, to ease some of this keto flu, to make it an easier transition for you. I have a private Facebook group going, and so we communicate through that. You can ask any questions. I'm giving recipes and menus. People are showing me their recipes and what they're doing. I'm going to throw in 20 keto-friendly recipes, and you guys, this is not the point of the whole program. Really, the point of the whole program is trying to figure out how to implement high-quality, healthy fats back into your diet, how we're going to eliminate or reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the amount of carbohydrates. How do you actually do this? How do you do it successfully? And how do you do it so that it can be sustainable? I want this to be a sustainable way of choosing your food and choosing your recipes for long-term cellular health. You have access to me. I'm super interested in talking to people and seeing how it's going. Or if you just have a question, then you have access to me, and I'm happy to answer questions for people. And there's a shopping list. I'm going to give you some great information on timing. When to eat is really important. And then we're going to talk about fasting. We're going to do intermittent fasting. And then we're going to give you the option to do these longer fasting. And I'm going to guide you through it so that we can make it a lot easier, so that you come out of the fast a very happy and healthy fasting human being. I've been running this program. I'm super excited. We're having really great success with it. I am charging $297 right now for the 6-week program for all of this information and access and all the guided information. You can take it during the 6 weeks and then take off running with it. So I hope that you have gotten some really good information out of this. If you have any questions on nutritional ketosis, if you're somebody who is not in Santa Cruz and you're super interested in this, please message me, because I have a way that you can do some of these readings on your own. I can guide you through that. But more importantly, you're going to get all of the information and still access to me through the private Facebook group and all of this great information that I have for you. Thank you for listening. And again, I hope you got some really great information out of this.